Welcome to the show. Tim Santoni here with the Santoni Spotlight. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Anita Nygaard, CORHR. Anita, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. Before we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and your HR consulting practice so the viewers have a sense of background and type of clients you work with.
Sounds good. I am an HR practitioner because this is the profession that I chose, Tim. There aren't many folks who actually chose it. There are plenty who fell into it, willingly or not. But I actually consciously chose it back when I was deciding whether to go to law school or grad school. My undergraduate is in industrial and labor relations. I actually went to school in upstate New York at Cornell. And when I was deciding that I thought that I wanted to go to law school, I worked as a paralegal for a period of time. And it was during that period that I decided I wanted to be an interventionist. So I didn't want to just clean up after the elephant had made the mess. I wanted to get in there before and try to prevent situations that would end up in litigation, what I thought was unnecessary litigation. So that's how I made the choice to go to grad school and pursue human resources and organization development instead of law school, which took me out west to California to pursue that.
So you learned early on that the law side of it would be great, but you'd rather get in before the attorneys start filing and litigating and fighting.
Exactly.
Interesting.
There's no resolution at that point for the employer and the employee to try to see how they can work it out. You're just kind of recognizing that there are differences that aren't reconcilable. Yeah.
Sure. So because of your background and all the situations you've seen and the employers you work with, maybe give us a sense of like the top 3 mistakes that you see employers making that maybe that they call you, and maybe you can fix or can't fix, but just from a general business perspective, what are those mistakes?
Number one, employers are really good at the type of business that they're in. And our state has done a really good job of making it unnecessarily complex to try to be an employer. So what I like to say is that if you have an employee handbook that has been updated and that gets looked at every year, reviewed by a professional, and then gets distributed to your employees, you can really take care of a good 85% of the misunderstandings that occur on a regular basis in the workplace between employees and employers. Because people will hear snippets of information in the media, and they'll think that they know exactly what that means, and in actuality they don't. And sometimes the employer doesn't understand it, sometimes the employee doesn't understand it. But when you have a compliant employee handbook to reference, then you can kind of clear the air. And if there are differences of opinion where you can't really clear the air in a civil way, we'll say, then it's a good idea to call on a professional to try to help hear both sides and see what path we can take moving forward.
Gotcha. So I would assume that you see a lot of mistakes with either a bad handbook or no handbook.
No handbook.
And then once you get involved and they say, okay, yeah, we want to have a handbook and we want to build this out, what are some other things you typically uncover as you kind of go through that audit or uncovering process of what's really going on in the business?
For sure, yeah.
Without sharing any of the names, and we'll keep them, confidential, but just the stories will live on.
Of course. The best thing about being in HR is I may not drive a Bentley, but I've got the best cocktail stories to share, and the names always get changed.
That's right.
Or removed or just left off. But yeah, it's also it's not as clear cut as you might think about properly classifying your worker, whether your worker qualifies as an independent contractor or an employee, and then if you decide to classify your worker as an employee, whether the position qualifies to be exempt from daily overtime or whether it should be eligible for overtime, and whether those employees should be doing daily timekeeping. So, certainly overtime is expensive in our state, and a lot of employers like to minimize unnecessary costs. Sure. And sometimes they play that card a little bit too heavily when they shouldn't. And other times you get employees who say, I feel that being a non-exempt employee makes me feel like a worker on an assembly line, and I thought that I was more professional than that. Sure. So there can be good reasons on either side of the table about having a good-natured confusion about a proper classification. And then outside of that, I would say when it comes to leaves of absences, that's another tricky area for employers and employees both to try to navigate together. So when it comes to these types of issues, what types of obligations does an employer really have how to correctly classify workers and employment roles, and how to navigate through leaves of absences. Those are three key areas where employers would really want to work with a trained professional to be able to have some advice and guidance.
Sure. Yes, that's a good point you brought up about, especially recently. You're misclassifying them and not intentionally, and you have to do that. So,
Right.
what are some? I mean, obviously you can give some coaching to the employer or the HR professional, but in your experience, what's a good way to kind of have that discussion where you're like try to let the employee know that they're valuable, but
Sure.
and it's not a degrading of them by changing that just from exempt to non-exempt. I mean, I imagine that's a difficult conversation.
I really like to look at those types of conversations as an opportunity to help the employee understand the important aspects of the role that they fulfill and how performing that role to the best of their ability really adds to the success of the business. Where companies have perhaps shied away or haven't made time to do job descriptions, it's a very important exercise to do because it shows your employees the value of their role and how it contributes to the success of the company. And at the end of the day, that's what every employee wants to know. They want to understand at the end of the week, I want to feel good about my contributions. I've chosen to make my contributions here, especially during this time of low unemployment, when employees are very actively voting with their feet if they feel that they're not growing and learning. This is a great time for employers to take the opportunity to sit with their employees, show them how their contributions add to the success, define it in a job description. Again, I recommend working with a professional to at least review it, and let the employee understand how the classification of the role suits them and benefits that employee, as well as the business by having their contributions.
That's a great point. So it kind of goes along with the overall kind of performance management and kind of tying it into, hey, look, this is the benefit you bring, and it has really nothing to do with the classification, but your roles and duties in there. And again, people talk about job descriptions as these terrible things to create, but there's a good example of how it could be useful in avoiding potential classification issues. So it's an interesting point.
It's a bonding experience. It should be a bonding experience so that employee understands this is why it's so important. This is why what I do is so important. This is why the priorities fall. This is why business priorities fall the way they do, even though I might like particular aspects of my job better than others.
Sure. So, obviously you're getting called upon and working in a variety of different employers. We work together on certain clients in different fields, but maybe give us a recent example of a client success story, either in the outcome was really good or was it really enjoyable for you in terms of what transpired and what took place. The good stuff, because we always talk about the firing and the compliance and litigation, but maybe give us a story that, where the outcome was either positive for the employee, the company, or, the overall, it was a win-win.
Sure. I have to draw upon an example, and this is fairly recent, with a client of mine, a small engineering firm in Orange County, and the partners have recently decided on a change of direction for the company, and I think it's really going to work out for them in the long run. But it also raised awareness that there were some processes that really weren't well defined in the company. So along those lines, we started to take a look at their performance management system, and they had tried to implement I'll call it 270 degree.
As opposed to 360?
Yeah, it wasn't 360, and the 270 was wobbly at best. So peers were allowed to comment on other peers' performance. The employees really didn't have training on how to do that correctly. Turns out the employees were uncomfortable with the process. I read some of the feedback, and in one of the comments, an employee said, "I think Colin is super groovy." Well, maybe Colin is super groovy, but what type of development feedback is that going to provide to the employee? And why are we wasting time with this type of a system? So I met with the management team, and we really simplified the performance management form. And not only did it allow an opportunity for the manager and the employee to really have a much more valuable dialogue just with each other about setting goals and what was important, what were going to be the priorities going forward, but it allowed them to have more of a personal development dialogue as well about what was going well, what the employee felt that he or she wanted more on the job. So it allowed these conversations where the employee and the manager could have such a meaningful opportunity to have this exchange that now they're coming back and asking me questions about training, providing more training for their employees, grooming their management a little bit more so that they can be career coaches in addition to just managing the work. So it's really opened up some new avenues, and it all started by just turning over a particular rock, taking a look at the performance management system and saying, is this really working for you? So it's amazing what you can find when you start to turn over some of those rocks and take a look at processes that have been in place, but that may not have been working for the business or for the employees.
Sure. So that brings up an interesting point. Is performance management. We always talk about that kind of from a reactive approach when we typically have someone who's underperforming or not meeting those. But why, in your experience and my experience is that when you bring those things up, typically you get a good response from the employees because they want to feel like they're engaged and they have some impact on that.
Right.
So, why is it you think that a lot of employers, these small, mid-sized employers, even large employers, are reluctant to implement things like that? Is it, why does that happen? Why is that typically the case?
It's a really good question. And in my experience in working with a lot of different businesses, and I've been doing this well over 20 years, it comes down to a couple of things. Fear.
Fear of what they're going to say.
What am I going to get? What am I getting myself into? And do I really understand how to navigate through this?
Mm-hmm.
And what's perceived as the time commitment. So what I'd like to say is that when I've worked with clients and we've gone through this process of trying to develop a better performance management system and helping to give managers some development training to help them become more confident at managing their people, some of the most common feedback that I receive from the management team is that they have more time.
Mm.
When they're more comfortable about managing their employees, and when the employees have more responsibilities than they've had in the past, because the managers are more comfortable delegating decision making down to the employee. When that all happens and it all lines up, the managers get more time back so that they can be more strategic. You don't have to deal with all those little fires, those little things that come up that keep you in the weeds, where you think you're doing an effective job managing it. If you can just get in the office at 6 a.m. and you're not going to leave before 8 p.m., you think that you're being a good manager, and you're not. You're actually misusing the resources available to you that are your team. Employees, in my estimation, and there are plenty of experts who've backed this up, employees should have a good 90% control over the decision making that involves their role. And when they do, you find a more productive employee, a more engaged employee. I know that can be a buzzword, but you find that employees really know a lot about how to make that more effective and how to be a better performer for their company when they have more control over the decision making. Then they can always bring suggestions and recommendations to management and say, here's how I see it, here's why, let's do something about this.
That's interesting because the fear aspect of it and the time aspect of implementing it, right? Logically, it's going to take time to implement this program,
Sure.
But at the same time, employers or managers are always talking about, I wish I could delegate more, free me up time to do more strategic things. So
That's right.
They just took the time on the front end to do that. You probably alleviate a lot of the performance issues, the recognition issues, and you free up, avoid kind of anxiety and stress that results from fear of delegation, and also, I think the thing that we want is always the ability and bandwidth to delegate strategic objectives to people on our teams, and yet we're not doing those things that are so simple and really don't take as much time, like a performance, program or training people. Training is a broad term, but really working to kind of bring those people together. That's really an interesting point. Great. So, working on this for a while, we've shared some war stories. I know that sometimes people are like, oh, I need to bring you and your team in because we need to clean house and we need to do these things. And so we've talked about conversations about, the hired gun approach. And your take on that is very interesting. Maybe share with our viewers, a story or an example where someone's like, hey, we need to kind of clean house, and your approach to that, as you being someone that they're working with as opposed to the business owner responsibilities, and that how that should play out in your view and your experience.
Sure, yes. Yeah, from time to time, sometimes this will happen with brand new clients. They'll say, oh, so-and-so, a trusted business partner, has referred me to you because I feel that there are some low performers in my company that I really need to part ways with. And so what I like to do is sit down with them and find out a little bit more about what the performance issues were with these individuals. The key things that I'm trying to hone in on in those types of meetings are, is the individual salvageable and just hasn't been managed correctly? Because what a terrible waste of a resource to exit someone from your business, particularly if they've been with you for over 5 years, just because they haven't been managed correctly when they could be a real value, perhaps in another role or under another manager. So I really like to sort through what are some of the issues there. If there is an overarching business objective that they need to get to, and we work with many different industries, and in some industries, if the demand goes down, you just don't have enough revenue coming in to be able to support the payroll for everybody. So if there's an overarching business goal that we need to get to, that's a very different type of an agenda. And I will work with business owners to determine where do we make the cuts that make the most sense while still trying to keep a viable structure together for the rest of the organizations. Those are two very different types of exercises. But it is common that businesses will have a knee-jerk reaction at times. Perhaps there's a temporary downturn, or perhaps there has been a particular individual that's been difficult to manage, and the company says, maybe there's an easier way. Other than managing through the issue, maybe there's an easier way to get rid of this problem. So we try to apply some good sense, logic, strategy, and be mindful of the laws that are in place and applicable.
Great. Awesome. Well, before we let you go, we have a little lightning round where we just put 30 seconds on the clock and run through some questions that are just kind of off the cuff. So first off, coffee or tea?
Honestly, I drink both, but I'm more heavy. I love the coffee perk, but I have tea more regularly.
Okay, great. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Favorite app?
Oh, goodness. It would have to be like something along with judging traffic. So.
Oh my gosh, everyone's talking about maps
Traffic.
Or Waze.
Yeah.
So if we're on the road a lot.
Southern Cal, baby.
That's right.
I'm on the road all day, every day.
All right, and then what's the best book that you read in the last 12 months?
Oh. Well, my daughter and I are working. She's actually worked through the series already, but we're working through A Wrinkle in Time in that series, and so she's way ahead. She's read them all, and I'm way behind her. But they're a really enjoyable read.
Awesome. Well, Anita, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
I enjoyed it.
Bye.